Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to one of the most uncomfortable, confusing, and frankly brutal chapters of medieval history, the Crusades. You're not a king, not a knight, not a noble. You're a dirt-poor peasant with a dream, some old shoes, and a death wish disguised as holy purpose. The mud's cold, the sky's spitting sleet, and your cloak smells like damp hay and goat. Your name? Doesn't matter. Most people can't spell it anyway. You're just you, a desperate soul who raised your hand when a greasy preacher shouted about glory and sin and something called Jerusalem. You're told it's a land flowing with milk, honey, and probably better boots. You've never left your village before. You're already wondering if this was a bad idea. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening from a hayloft in Germany or under 3 blankets in Canada, drop your location and time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You made a vow in a field with no roof, next to 100 other villagers. Your priest crying dramatically into a gob of wine he definitely didn't pay for. Pope Urban had called for a holy war. Deus Vult. The crowd had roared. You didn't know Latin, but the local blacksmith told you it meant God wills it, and also say goodbye to your crops. You wanted forgiveness. That's the truth. Maybe you stole from the tied barn. Maybe your brother's death still sits wrong with you. Or maybe, just maybe, you wanted to matter. And the crusade? It promised all of that. Forgiveness of sins, a place in heaven, even a chance to come home rich. Of course, nobody mentioned how far Jerusalem actually is, or how little planning went into this whole operation. You left home with a bundle of bread crusts, a walking stick, and a leather satchel with holes in it. That was 6 days ago, and your feet already look like someone tried to boil them. The first real problem? Mud. The kind that grabs your ankles and whispers, "You'll never leave Bavaria." Every field is a swamp. Every village you pass is either suspicious, hostile, or recently pillaged by the last wave of pilgrims. It's hard to make friends when your traveling companions include a goat thief, a flagellant who whips himself constantly, and someone who definitely has fleas. Still, there's something noble about it all. You tell yourself this as you scrape manure off your tunic. Every step is a penance. Every blister, a badge of faith. You sing hymns at night, until you fall asleep on a mossy log, waking up with frozen toes and someone else's boot print on your face. You pass cities you've never heard of, full of people who stare at you like you're a traveling circus, just smellier and more confused. They throw things sometimes. Old fruit. One guy threw a live chicken. You're not sure if that was a gift or an insult. You took it anyway. The worst part? The hunger. You thought the countryside would be full of game. Turns out, the countryside is full of people just like you, starving and pretending they're on a holy journey instead of a slow death march. There's talk of miracles, but mostly what you see are empty fields, dead oxen, and lots of barefoot pilgrims who already regret everything. One night, you meet a boy no older than 12, carrying a wooden sword and a piece of bread so moldy it might have developed its own crusade. He tells you his whole family died of dysentery. He came anyway. He says God told him to. You don't have the heart to argue. Historians still argue whether the early Crusader bands, like the People's Crusade, had any formal structure at all. Some say it was a spontaneous religious movement. Others say it was just a bunch of starving mobs with torches. You're starting to think it was both. Organized chaos with a hymnal and a spear. One evening, as you huddle near a smoking dung fire, you hear someone claim the Pope himself walks among the elite knights ahead. Another swears he saw an angel back in Mainz. There's a lot of talk like that. But no angels here, just lice and lies and a priest who keeps borrowing everyone's bread for blessings that smell suspiciously like chewing. You trade your last copper coin for a scrap of dried fish. It tastes like guilt and wood ash, but it's the best thing you've eaten in days. You think about home, your father's barn, the little stream where you used to catch frogs. You miss frogs. Sleep is hard to come by. Every night, you lie awake under the stars, stomach howling, wondering what Jerusalem even looks like. You've heard it's golden. You've heard it's burning. You've also heard it's guarded by sorcerers and demons and men who eat Christians. Honestly, at this point, you're not picky. You just want to see it before something eats you. By now, your goal is clear. Reach the Holy Land, cleanse your soul, and somehow not die of foot rot along the way. The challenge? Pretty much everything. The cold, the hunger, the lack of maps, the fact that your commander is a bearded man with a twitch who thinks he's the reincarnation of Charlemagne. But you keep walking, because deep down there's a flicker. Hope? Stubbornness? Maybe just the fear of quitting. You walked out of your village with nothing but conviction, a staff, and the blessing of a priest who didn't know your name. Somewhere out there, you believe something holy is waiting for you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get there before your boots give out. Also, fun fact, in 1096, some crusading bands got so lost they accidentally attacked Christian cities, thinking they were Saracen strongholds, which feels like something your group might also do. Someone yesterday pointed at a windmill and called it a Muslim tower. You didn't correct them. You were too tired. You wrap your arms around your knees and try to sleep. Tomorrow is another march, another prayer, another chance to find purpose in a world where everything smells like wet wool and regret. You wake up to the sound of snoring and someone violently arguing with a chicken. That's how mornings go now. The fire went out hours ago. The dew has soaked through your tunic, and someone definitely took your last crust of bread. Again, the long march continues. Not so much a pilgrimage as a medieval game of don't fall over. You're surrounded by fellow dreamers, criminals, zealots. At least one guy who thinks the moon is a holy eye watching your every sin. He's very loud about it. You're marching with what some later called the People's Crusade, but feels more like a religiously motivated hiking disaster. There's no map, no real leader, just an endless line of pilgrims slogging through countryside that seems to actively resent your presence. Every village you pass, people either lock their doors or try to sell you extremely expired cheese. There's no middle ground. You're in Germany now, or maybe Bohemia. Hard to tell. Nobody has proper signs, and you've passed the same bent tree 3 times. You suspect you're lost. But nobody wants to admit it, because then we'd all have to acknowledge that walking to Jerusalem based on vibes alone might have been a poor strategy. Feet. Let's talk about your feet. They're no longer feet. They're sacks of wet skin with toenails you don't recognize. Someone gave you a pair of ill-fitting sandals a week ago, and now every step feels like a theological punishment. You've prayed for divine intervention, and maybe also better insoles. Food is worse. You've eaten moss, boiled bark, something that might have once been an onion, but now looks like a fossil. One guy in your group has taken to eating candle wax. He says it helps with his digestion. You think he's slowly becoming the wax. Every once in a while, you pass a monastery. You've learned monks will feed you if you agree to 3 hours of sermon first. And sermon here means one guy yelling in Latin while you stare at his chicken and wonder if he's going to eat it in front of you. He does. You cry silently. The thing is, you're still hopeful. Somewhere in the horizon is Jerusalem. Probably, if not, at least Constantinople, where, rumor has it, the real Crusaders are assembling. The knights. The armor-wearing professionals with actual plans and something better than sticks. So you walk, past wind-worn ruins, across freezing rivers, through valleys that echo your chant of Deus Vult. Even when half the group doesn't know what they're saying, one man thinks it's a kind of soup. Honestly, it might be. At one point, a group of German nobles ride past. Their horses are shiny, their armor gleams, and they smell like lavender and not armpit death. They don't even look at you, just gallop past while your group stares with collective envy and foot fungus. Somewhere near the Rhine, you witness your first skirmish. Not against Saracens. Oh no, against another group of Crusaders who thought your crew was trying to steal their wine. It's 10 minutes of yelling, 3 broken noses, and 1 very confused donkey. Eventually, everyone just walks away. Welcome to the Crusades. Now with more misunderstandings. Historians still argue whether these early groups were truly organized crusaders or just roving mobs of holy confusion. Some say they were manipulated by opportunistic preachers. Others argue they genuinely believed they were carrying out God's will. You, for one, just want socks that don't give you trench foot. One night, someone tells a story around the fire about Jerusalem having walls made of gold, where angels walk the streets, and the air smells like cinnamon. Someone else says it's filled with demons and rivers of blood. Both ideas sound equally exhausting. You focus on the cinnamon. A new leader rises among you. Count Emicho, a German noble with a big sword, a booming voice, and absolutely no idea what he's doing. He declares that all non-believers along the way must be purged. The word purge makes your skin crawl, but the crowd cheers. You're too tired to argue and too afraid not to follow. Soon after, things turn dark. Towns are raided. Not just foreign ones, Christian ones. Jewish communities are attacked in Mainz and Speyer. People who had nothing to do with the Crusades are blamed for everything wrong in Europe. You see it. You try to look away. But history doesn't let you forget. A scholar once wrote that this wasn't a march of faith. It was a march of desperation, revenge, and scapegoating. That rings true now. You didn't sign up for this. You signed up for absolution. A clean slate. But this feels wrong. Still, the march continues. You cross rivers in makeshift rafts. One collapses, dumping 30 people into freezing water. Nobody has the strength to mourn. You just watch their cloaks sink below the surface, then keep walking. One of your traveling companions, a man named Peter, starts coughing blood. He insists it's just a cold. A week later, he's gone. No burial, just a pile of stones and a prayer half remembered. You knew him for 3 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. The sky is always gray now. Your dreams, when you have them, are of warm bread and clean sheets. You once dreamed of battle, of glory. Now you just want to feel your feet again. Or not. Honestly, not feeling anything might be a relief. Quirky tidbit: there were some crusaders who believed that bathing too often was sinful, an act of vanity. So they went entire months without washing, believing body odor was a sign of piety. You're currently surrounded by 400 signs of extreme piety. As you cross into unfamiliar territory, maybe Hungary, maybe not, someone says Constantinople is only a few weeks away. You want to believe them. But then again, someone last week said he saw a dragon. So, grain of salt. The wind picks up. Your cloak flaps behind you like a flag of exhaustion. But still you march, because in your heart, you believe you'll reach something. If not Jerusalem, then something like redemption. And honestly, you just want to see a real road, one without potholes, or bandits, or someone try and convert you again with a loaf of bread and a very aggressive chant. The road stretches ahead, muddy, relentless, holy, they say, but it just looks like more walking. You should have died 3 days ago. That's the general vibe as you collapse beside a mossy boulder, breath wheezing, knees locked, and eyelids doing that weird flutter they do before passing out or receiving a vision from St. Jerome. You're not sure which one this will be, but that's when she finds you. At first, you think she's a mirage. You had a few of those lately. Last night you hallucinated a loaf of bread, riding a donkey, and cried for an hour. But no, this woman is real. Realer than you. She stands over you in a patched leather coat, squinting with the distinct expression of someone wondering whether you're worth saving. "You dead?" she asks, nudging your ribs with a very well-used boot. "Maybe," you croak. She snorts, mutters something about weaklings, and hauls you up like a sack of barley. And just like that, your life takes a turn. Her name is Marta. She's maybe 40, maybe 60. Time clearly gave up trying to keep track. She carries a blade longer than your arm, a pack full of mysterious tools, and the confidence of someone who's already outlived 5 husbands and 2 wars. You quickly learn she's no pilgrim. She's an ex-mercenary, fought in border skirmishes, defended trade caravans, and once stabbed a noble for trying to touch her goat. The goat won. She's also the best swordsman you've ever seen, which isn't saying much, since you've mostly seen people poke themselves trying to unsheath their blades. But still, you beg her to teach you. Not with words. Your mouth's too dry for that. But your sad puppy eyes and inability to stand up straight do the trick. And just like that, you're no longer a clueless peasant with a dream and shin splints. You're a clueless peasant with a mentor. Training begins immediately because apparently dying is bad form. Marta starts with posture. You fight like a sack of laundry, she tells you. Then she hands you a stick and whacks your legs every time you flinch, which is often. You spend days stumbling through abandoned fields, learning how to pivot, parry, and not scream every time someone yells. She drills footwork into your bones, and eventually your steps become less dying stork and more competent duck. You don't just learn to fight. You learn how to sharpen blades with river stones, how to check a campsite for ambushes, how to fake sleep while listening for approaching footsteps. You feel not powerful exactly, but less helpless. Like, maybe you won't die in the next tavern brawl. And yes, there are tavern brawls. One night, you and Marta make the mistake of sleeping near a roadside and where some French knights are celebrating their holy purpose by drinking their body weight in mead. One of them calls Marta a witch. She calls him a walking rash. You don't even see her move. One moment she's sipping broth. The next he's on the floor, weeping into his beard. She doesn't kill him, which is merciful. But she does take his belt and give it to you. You've earned this, she says. Try not to trip over it. You begin to admire her. Deeply, not in a romantic way. Marta would probably knife you in the spleen for trying. No, it's more like awe. She's lived in this brutal world. Chewed it up and spit it out, all while teaching you how to swing a stick with intent. You ask her why she's not in the official crusade with the real knights. She laughs. They don't like women with opinions. Or knives. Fair enough. There's one night, under a canopy of stars, when she tells you about a battle near the Danube. She lost half her company, walked for 6 days through a blizzard, and survived by eating boiled bark and horse glue. Don't cry, she says, seeing your face. It builds character. Historians have long debated the presence of women in the Crusades. Most traditional texts downplay or ignore them, but more recent scholarship suggests that women, some disguised, others openly defiant, played significant roles, not just as camp followers, but as fighters, medics, and, in Marta's case, informal teachers of self-preservation. You wonder how many Marta's history forgot. There's a moment, just one, when you impress her. You're ambushed by 2 thieves on the road, one with a short blade and the other with a sling. Marta draws her sword, but you step forward first, block the blade, and knock the guy flat with your borrowed belt buckle. It's messy, clumsy, but it works. She nods once, doesn't smile, just says, well, you didn't die. That's new. That's the highest compliment you get. Quirky tidbit? Some Crusaders believe that wearing relics like toe bones of saints or bits of old crucifixes would protect them from harm. Marta carries a rabbit's foot. This one hasn't failed me yet, she says. You're not convinced, but you rub it when she's not looking, just in case. Eventually, she says it's time to move on. You're strong enough now, she says. You'll be fine. You're not sure what hurts more, your sore legs or the lump in your throat. You want to ask her to stay, but you know she won't. People like Marta don't stay. They appear when you need them, smack you with a stick, and vanish when you're strong enough to stand on your own. You hug her, just once. She pats your back and mutters something about being soft. Then she's gone, down a hill, vanishing into the mist like some kind of holy mosquito, bite you'll never forget. You continue walking, alone again, but changed, stronger, a little wiser, with a slightly better stance and one less molar, thanks tavern brawl. And in the quiet, trudging hours that follow, you find yourself whispering a prayer, not to the Pope or the saints or even to God, just to Marta, because you're going to make it. You're going to survive. You owe her that. You reach Constantinople on the 3rd day of no food and the 5th day of regret. It rises on the horizon like a vision, gleaming domes, towering spires, and city walls so massive you briefly consider just walking into them to end the journey. But this is no ordinary city. This is the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the last flickering torch of Rome itself. You expect fanfare, trumpets, maybe a soft bed, and a hard biscuit. Instead, you get sneered at. The locals call you Francois, a catch-all for the rude, smelly, uncivilized Westerners flooding their gates. You were hoping for a triumphant entry. What you get is a holding area outside the walls and a very firm warning from Byzantine soldiers that entry does not imply hospitality. Welcome to diplomacy, 11th century style. You're herded into a crude camp of tents, carts, and far too many flies. The air smells like boiled cabbage and despair. You wander around, hoping to find someone in charge, but every leader looks like they just crawled out of a wine barrel. Someone yells about God's will. Someone else tries to sell you a fake relic, a holy nail, that is definitely just a rusted horseshoe. Still, you're not entirely alone. You find others from the People's Crusade you lost weeks ago. They're thinner, dirtier, and much more suspicious of everyone. They tell you horror stories. Groups that split off and vanished, mercenaries who turn on their own for bread, and one poor soul who mistook leeches for dinner. The city beyond the walls glows gold under the sun. You ache to step inside, but the Byzantines keep the gates mostly closed. To them, you're not liberators. You're liabilities. And honestly, fair. Historians still argue about Emperor Alexios I Komnenos' role in the early Crusades. Some claim he invited Western knights for help and immediately regretted it. Others argue he was a master manipulator, using Crusaders like chess pieces against the Seljuk Turks. Either way, the vibe you get from the walls is, please go away. Eventually, you're summoned, sort of. A group of your ragged cohort is allowed into the city to meet the emperor. Not you. You're left outside. But you hear stories about marble halls, flowing fountains, and gold so polished you could see your lights crawling across your reflection. They also say the emperor handed out money and food. You suspect half of it a lie, and the other half is exaggerated. That's the Crusader way. One afternoon, a soldier throws you a stale biscuit. You thank him like he just handed you the Ark of the Covenant. He rolls his eyes and mutters something in Greek that probably wasn't your welcome. Quirky tidbit? Some pilgrims, upon seeing Constantinople for the first time, believe it was Jerusalem. You laugh when you hear that, until you realize someone in your group is now trying to build a shrine out of goose bones just in case. You're restless. This waiting, this purgatory between Europe and war, is worse than the marching. You're close now. So close. The real knights are gathering just beyond the horizon. Bohemond of Taranto, Raymond of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon. Names that already sound like legends. They're not here for the same reasons as you. They want land, titles, glory. You just want to stop smelling like desperation. And then the twist. Rumors spread like mold in a wet boot. The People's Crusade is being moved across the Bosporus. You're being shipped over the water. You think, finally, movement, progress, maybe a real battle. But then you remember, most of your group still doesn't have weapons, or armor, or any actual plan. Just faith and feet that no longer have skin. The day arrives. You're loaded into creaky boats with about as much stability as a drunk chicken. The crossing is short but nauseating. Half the group throws up. One man swears he saw a sea demon. Another tries to baptize himself mid-trip and nearly drowns. You arrive in Asia Minor, soaking, shivering, and slightly holier. This, they tell you, is the real crusade. You look around at the forested hills and broken stone roads and think, this looks exactly like the fake one. Still, there's a new sense of purpose. You've crossed into enemy territory. This is where the Seljuk Turks rule, and this is where the fighting begins. You expect discipline, formation, strategy. What you get is a suggestion that you go raid something. You and a few dozen others head toward a small village that, according to someone with zero evidence, is held by Turks. Turns out it's empty. You loot it anyway, because that's what Crusaders do now. Take things and pray later. And then it happens. The Seljuk Turks respond. One morning, the horizon fills with fast-moving shadows. Horse archers. Silent. Efficient. Terrifying. You run. Everyone runs. It's not a battle. It's a rout. The Turks barely need to fight. They just appear, fire a few arrows, and watch your group collapse like wet parchment. You see people scream, trip, disappear into brush. The dream of Jerusalem scatters into 1,000 terrified footsteps. You hide in a bush. You clutch your borrowed belt. You think of Marta and wish you'd asked how to not die. By nightfall, the camp is in shambles. The Turks vanish again like smoke. It was a warning, and it worked. Later, survivors crawl back to the base camp, wounded, ashamed, still hungry. No one talks. You stare into the fire and think, so this is war. And it hasn't even started yet. You lie awake under the stars, belly growling, brain buzzing, wondering if this is where most Crusaders meet their holy destiny. Not on a grand battlefield, but face down in the dirt after a week of doing exactly the wrong things. It's quiet now. Too quiet. You're back at the makeshift base camp on the Anatolian plateau. Still technically part of the People's Crusade, though it's more of a loose collection of hunger-driven optimists than a real army. Everyone's shaken. Even the loud ones who used to brag about slaughtering Saracens in their dreams are silent now, eyes darting at every shadow. You don't know it yet, but you're part of a growing mess that will end in one of the dumbest military decisions in Crusader history. There's a man, well, more of a thundercloud with legs, named Reynald. He's from Cologne, he has one eye, and he keeps talking about proving God's favor through boldness. This is Reynald's personality in a nutshell. Loud, aggressive, and completely allergic to planning. A few days after the failed raid, he makes a speech by torchlight. It's all fire and brimstone and "we're chosen by God" nonsense. You've heard enough speeches by now to know that when people say chosen by God, it usually means I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'd like you to follow me anyway. Still, about 6,000 people agree, including you. Why? Because you're tired of waiting. Because fear feels better when it's moving. And because deep down, you still believe that if you keep going, Jerusalem might not be a mirage. And so, off you march with Reynald and his holy band of future ghosts. You head east, toward the town of Zeragordon. It's barely a fortress, more like a crumbling hilltop with a wall and a small well. You seize it easily from the small Turkish garrison station there. For one shining moment, it feels like victory. You even find a cache of grain and dried figs. Everyone feasts like fools. There's laughter, singing. Someone starts sketching what they'll tell their grandchildren, and then the siege begins. The Seljuk Turks are fast, like really fast. Led by a commander named Elkanes, they swarm the area around Zeragordon, cutting off all access to the outside world. You and your comrades are trapped. No reinforcements, no resupply, no water. Oh, yes, the well in the fortress? It dries up by the third day, so begins the thirst. You didn't know you could feel your tongue shrink. You didn't know the inside of your eyelids could feel scratchy. People begin drinking anything. Vinegar, blood, urine. Some even crack open donkey intestines looking for liquid. It's desperation at its most creative. Scholars debate how long the siege lasted. Some say 8 days, others say longer. But they all agree on the ending: surrender. Reynald himself is captured, paraded like a prize. The others? Many are enslaved. Some are executed. A few are forced to convert to Islam, and later, when the main Crusader army arrives, are discovered alive and quietly shunned. But you got lucky. You left the night before the siege started. Not out of wisdom, out of stomach problems. You wandered away from the group to deal with an unfortunate lentil stew incident and ended up lost. When you finally caught sight of the siege from a hillside, you didn't charge in like a hero. You watched, froze, and quietly turned around. You still hate yourself for it. The days that follow are haunted. You make your way back to the main camp, half dead and muttering apologies to ghosts. No one's there to greet you. News spreads that the entire contingent that followed Reynald is gone. Thousands. Just gone. The People's Crusade is broken. And you're still alive. You stumble around like a cracked puppet. Someone hands you a bowl of thin porridge. You barely notice. Your ears ring. Your legs shake. You begin to wonder if maybe surviving is worse than dying. That's when Peter returns. Yes, that Peter. Peter the Hermit. Turns out he'd left earlier, riding back to Constantinople to try to get supplies, or maybe just take a break from being surrounded by blisters and disappointment. When he returns and sees a disaster, he's devastated. Sort of. He gives another speech. This one is softer, slower, full of apologies and metaphors about wheat and fire. You don't listen. You just stare at his face and think, you started all this. Historians argue to this day whether Peter was a sincere zealot or a charismatic opportunist. Some see him as a tragic figure, genuinely devoted, utterly out of his depth. Others view him as the worst kind of leader, inspiring, naive, and ultimately lethal. All you know is that when he kneels to pray that night, you don't join him. You're done with speeches. There's a quirky tale circulating among survivors. Someone claims that during the siege at Zeragordan, a man survived by licking dew off the blade of his own sword each morning. Probably not true, but now you instinctively check your sword for moisture every sunrise, just in case. What surprises you most is the quiet. After everything, the marches, the brawls, the fevered plans, the quiet feels wrong. You sit by a dying fire and think about Marta. Would she have charged into Zeragordan? No. She would have punched Reinald and taken his boots. You miss her more than ever. You don't cry. You're too dehydrated. Instead, you sit there, cracked and hollow with one burning thought. This can't be what God wanted. And in that moment, something changes. You still want Jerusalem. You still want meaning. But for the first time, you stop waiting for someone else to give it to you. If you're going to survive, it has to be you. Your blade. Your wits. Your choices. No more following lunatics into death traps. You lie down on the packed earth, staring up at a sky that doesn't care whether you live or die, and make yourself a quiet vow. Next time, you'll choose better. You wake up to shouting. Not the God has blessed us kind. The some idiot set a tent on fire again kind. Smoke curls up to the morning chill as a group of pilgrims runs in circles, trying to beat out the flames with their cloaks. You just watch, eyes half open, wondering if the fire would feel nice for a second before it kills you. This is life now. The People's Crusade, what's left of it. It still camp along the outskirts of Nicaea, a city that looms over the hills like a sleeping beast. Once the capital of the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia, now a target. But not for you. You're not leading any charges anymore. You're just existing, breathing, eating when there's food, staring at your feet when there isn't. The main crusading armies haven't arrived yet, but rumors swirl like flies. They're coming. Real knights, armored, trained, uninterested in your tragic backstory. You start to feel like a warm-up act whose set went way too long, and now everyone's just politely waiting for you to get off the stage. And yet, as broken as your group is, you're still here. That counts for something. One morning, a scout gallops into camp with dust in his teeth and panic in his eyes. The Turks are coming, he gasps, in force. Your stomach drops. They're not coming to chat. You've seen what Turkish horse archers can do. Fast, merciless, efficient. Last time they showed up, your comrades died drinking donkey blood. This time, they're not interested in sieges or symbolism. They're here to mop up the mess. Panic spreads through the camp. People pack what little they have. Some flee toward the river. Others fall to their knees and pray like the volume of their wailing will stop arrows. You make a decision, your first real decision in days. You grab your bag, what's left of your boots, and you run, not away, toward the Byzantines, toward the walls of Nicaea. You know they won't let you in, but maybe, just maybe, they'll point you toward someone who still knows how to hold a sword the right way up. As you sprint through the scrubby terrain, heart pounding, you spot something strange on the horizon. A banner, not Turkish, not Crusader. Byzantine, a small mounted patrol, riding ahead of a larger group. When they reach you, you wave both arms like a drowning man. The soldiers don't look impressed. One of them just sighs. Frank, he asks. You nod. Collapse. Mutter something between help and why is the sky spinning? They take you in, mostly because you look too pathetic to pose a threat. You're brought to a temporary Byzantine outpost, more like a large tent with guards and an actual base. Still it is wine, bread, cheese. The cheese makes you cry. Here, you learn the truth. Emperor Alexios is done with the People's Crusade. The massacre at Zeragordon sealed it. You're not seen as pilgrims anymore. You're seen as a problem, one that keeps getting thousands of people killed and doesn't wear shoes. Historians debate Alexios' intentions. Some say he never expected this many untrained fanatics to show up. Others think he used you as bait to distract the Turks before sending in the real army. You're not sure which is worse, being forgotten or being expendable. Still, the Byzantines don't abandon you. Not completely. They send you and a handful of other stragglers back across the Bosporus, back to Constantinople. It feels like retreat, failure, but it's also survival. The trip back is quieter. The ship barely creaks. The sea is calm. You sit on the deck beside another survivor, an old man who smells like onions and bad choices. He says nothing for hours and mutters, "I saw an angel once, before my son died." You nod. You don't tell him about Marta. You don't tell him you saw nothing but shadows. Back in Constantinople, things have changed. There are new banners, new troops, and most importantly, new Crusaders. The real ones, armored like walking fortresses, faces hidden under visors, weapons that aren't rusted farm tools. You're in awe, and slightly insulted by how clean they smell. You keep your distance, but you watch. One night, you sneak into a square where one of the knights is giving a speech. You catch the name, Godfrey of Bouillon. He talks about duty, honor, God's will. You expect to roll your eyes. Instead, you find yourself listening, not because you trust him, but because his voice doesn't shake. A younger knight hands out bread afterward. When he gives you a piece, he looks surprised. I thought all the People's Crusade was dead. You chew and shrug. Most are. He doesn't ask your name. The next few days are strange. You wander Constantinople like a ghost, half watching as the first wave of real Crusaders prepares to cross into Asia Minor. Everything is more organized, more deliberate. They even have maps. Maps. You're honestly stunned. One morning, a scribe outside a church offers to write your story. So many pilgrims vanished. He says, "We want to remember." You laugh. You decline. You don't want your name etched in some dusty scroll as one of the fools who walked across Europe for a dream and got smacked by reality. Instead, you make a decision. You're not going home. Not yet. You may not be a knight. You may not have a title, but you've come this far. You've seen what blind faith costs, and you've learned the value of caution, of listening, of surviving. So you follow the real Crusaders, not as one of them. Not yet, as an observer, a survivor, a ghost with dirt under their nails and too much history behind their eyes. You head to the docks. A new ship waits to cross the Bosporus. You step aboard without ceremony. No one notices. And that, honestly, feels perfect. The ship glides across the Bosporus like a tired dream, its sails creaking under the weight of armor and anticipation. You lean against a crate of onions. Because, of course, it's onions, watching the skyline of Constantinople fade behind you. Again, it's your second time crossing into Asia Minor, but this time feels different. Less like a crusade, more like unfinished business. You're not with the knights exactly. You're sort of adjacent. They don't stop you. Maybe they assume you're someone's servant or just another hanger-on. You've mastered the art of moving in the background, nodding at the right people, keeping your sword visible but unthreatening. You're like a traveling smudge of dried blood and quiet trauma. The real Crusader army is impressive, no question. You see standards from France, Lorraine, Flanders, even a few from the Norman south of Italy. These are the people history books meant to follow. Trained soldiers, hardened nobility, people who think Blister is just a lesser knight. Still, there's tension. Even among themselves, they don't fully trust each other. Some are only here because the Pope promised absolution. Others are in it for the land or the gold, or just because they're tired of being the third son with no inheritance. Everyone wants Jerusalem. No one agrees on how to get there. You travel with a small contingent under Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman noble with the kind of confident swagger that only comes from surviving 40-plus years of war and still having perfect hair. He's clever, ambitious, and possibly the best tactician among them, and definitely not someone you'd invite to dinner. Bohemond likes power more than God. That much is clear. But unlike Peter the Hermit or Reinald the Disaster Magnate, Bohemond knows how to win. And at this point, you're less interested in holiness and more interested in staying alive. The army begins its march inland. The landscape of Anatolia is cruel. Rolling hills that go on forever. Dust that clogs your teeth. Villages burn out or long abandoned. The air tastes like past violence. You start to wonder if the land itself resents you. Then the ambushes begin. The Seljuk Turks haven't gone anywhere. They're just smarter now. They don't charge into battles, they snipe, harass, hit supply lines, and vanish. Arrows whistle from unseen ridges. Men die without ever seeing who killed them. You grow sharper. Learn to spot the shimmer of movement on a distant slope. You start walking with your shield angled a little higher. The quietest parts of the journey become the most terrifying. You learn the smell of fear mixed with steel polish. One afternoon, while foraging with a small group, you find a half-buried helmet in a dry riverbed. Crusader design. Inside is a scroll wrapped in oilcloth. A letter in Latin, barely legible. If you read this, tell my father I tried. No name. You keep it anyway. The army eventually reaches Doryleum. It's a crossroads, both literally and in your soul. Here, the Seljuk Turks, under Sultan Kilij Arslan, decide to test Crusaders head-on. You're with the vanguard, Bohemond's men. When the Turks descend, it's chaos. They scream out of the hills like a firestorm. Horse archers circling, loosing arrows with uncanny precision. Bohemond's troops form a tight defensive circle. You dive in with them, shield up, heart pounding so loudly you think it'll shatter your ribs. It's like being in the center of a hurricane. Dust blinds you. Screams twist into something inhuman. Horses die mid-gallop, crashing into men who don't have time to scream. The sky goes brown with sand and death. Bohemond barks orders, voice cutting through the madness. Hold the line. They break if we hold. And you believe him, because what else can you do? Then the second wave arrives. From the west, Godfrey and the rest of the Crusader army, delayed but not defeated, crash into the Turkish flank. The tide turns. What was slaughter becomes survival. The Turks retreat, melting back into the hills. You stand, coated in blood that isn't yours, and realize you're still breathing, still holding your sword. You look around and see others just as stunned. It's victory, one of the first real ones. But it doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like numbness. The battlefield is a sprawl of broken bodies, snapped lances, and the occasional, weirdly peaceful helmet resting upright, as if waiting for a head to grow into it. That night, you can't sleep. Your hands shake as you try to eat. You end up feeding most of your bread to a stray dog that looks almost as traumatized as you. You name him Geoffrey, because he seems judgmental, and that feels appropriately French. There's a debate among historians about the scale of the battle. Some argue the Crusaders were vastly outnumbered. Others think those numbers were inflated to make the victory seem more miraculous. What no one disputes is that it was pivotal. Doryleum proved that the Crusaders, when organized, could beat the Turks. You were there. You felt it. The next morning, Bohemond makes his rounds. He looks at you, actually sees you. You brace for dismissal. Instead, he says, "You fought well. Didn't expect that from the barefoot ones." You nod, say nothing, but inside a small spark lights. You're not just a survivor now. You're becoming a soldier, and maybe, just maybe, someone worth remembering. Your boots are finally real. That's the first thing you notice as the army limps southward after Doryleum. Not the heat, not the rotting smell of spoiled meat tied too long to saddles, not even a sore shoulder where your shield strap cut into your flesh like a jealous dog. No, it's the boots. Leather, sturdy, stolen from a corpse, sure, but now yours. A dead Frenchman's bad luck, your feet's salvation. The Crusader army is changing. You're a part of it now, not officially, but close. Bohemon's men don't push you away anymore. They nod when you pass. One even offers you wine from a goat skin. You choke on it and nearly die. Instant camaraderie. The army begins moving through the scorched heart of Anatolia. The land is a slow knife. Sun above, dust below, nothing but cracked earth and the occasional dead donkey to remind you that nature also hates crusading. Water is scarce. Wells are sometimes poisoned. Other times, they're just bones. Byzantine guides try to lead you towards safe routes, but safe is relative. They disappear one night, gone without a trace. Some say they were spies. Others say they fled after one too many looks at what counted as food among the troops. You hear rumors of cannibalism again, mostly whispered, joked about, but when you see a pot left boiling with something suspiciously meaty, you decide it's best not to ask. Here's a thing you didn't expect. The church tries to help. A priest walks alongside you for a while. He offers a blessing. You ask if it'll protect your face from arrows. He sighs and says, it might help you meet your end with dignity. Reassuring. This part of the journey becomes a test of endurance. It's not about battles. It's about not dying in between battles. Men drop in the heat. Horses, too. You learn to sleep standing up, to chew stale bread for an hour so it doesn't rip your gums open, and to tell whether a cloud is real or just another heat mirage. But the path isn't all misery. One night, as you make camp on a rare hill with a breeze, a group of younger soldiers start singing in Occitan. You don't understand the words, but the tune feels like home, even if your home was chickens and wet ceilings. You hum along, and one of them hands you a bit of cheese that smells like punishment but tastes like heaven. That night, you dream of Marta. She's sitting in the doorway of your old hut, holding a baby you never had, smiling. It hurts to wake up. The Crusaders finally reach the region near Antioch. The city looms in the distance like some ancient riddle carved from stone and arrogance. High walls, towering gates, the kind of defenses that laugh at ladders and taunt battering rams. Taking Antioch is going to be impossible. Naturally, Bohemond wants it. The whole army sets up camp and begins a siege. And this is when things get really medieval. You think sieges are dramatic, fast-paced affairs? Not even close. They're long, tedious, weeks of hunger, of trench digging, of cursing engineers who've never actually built a trebuchet. The army surrounds the city, cuts off supply lines, and waits, and starves, and waits more, and starves harder. People start dying in their tents. Some leave to forage. Few return. The Turks inside Antioch watch from the walls, amused. They even throw taunts. Once, they toss a decapitated Crusader head with a note attached. It says, nice try. You begin to wonder if this is your grave. Bohemond starts plotting, always scheming. That one, he wants Antioch for himself, not just for the crusade. For Bohemond, he knows the others, Raymond of Toulouse, Godfrey, won't just hand it to him if they take it together. So he begins networking. You overhear a conversation you're not supposed to. Bohemond whispering with a local Armenian named Firas, a traitor inside the city, a gatekeeper. This is a twist. The siege isn't going to end with a grand assault or divine miracle. It's going to end with bribery and treachery. Historians still argue over Firas. Was he promised wealth? Power? A pardon? No one knows for sure. But what's agreed on is this. Bohemond's quiet plan changed everything. The gates would open from inside. You don't know exactly when it will happen, but you start watching the walls differently now. Not as barriers, but as waiting hands, ready to part. Then it happens. A cold, miserable night. Rain slicking your gear. You're half asleep, muttering to Jeffrey the dog about your blister count, when someone screams, "The gate!" You scramble to your feet. A small team, Bohemans, has entered the city. Fighting has broken out. Confused, chaotic, but it's happening. The long siege is shattering. You join the charge. No time to think. You run to the narrow stone passage of the gatehouse, slipping on blood, crashing into walls. Antioch is awake and furious. The Turks fight back with wild, desperate energy. Screams echo like an organ made of lungs. You fight your way through alleyways. Houses burn. You duck arrows, swing wildly, and at one point trip over a bishop who's looting a silver basin and pretending it's church property. You survive. Barely. By morning, the Crusaders control Antioch. Bohemond claims it. Of course he does. The others grumble. Raymond sulks. Godfrey prays harder than usual. But you just sit on the steps of a smashed bakery, blood on your arms, a crust of stolen bread in your mouth, staring up at sky that doesn't care. Antioch is yours. Or his. Or God's. You're not sure anymore. But you're alive. And in this story, that's the rarest miracle of all. The gates of Antioch swing. Behind you with sound like finality. You'd think after months of siege, capture would bring celebration. Wine, songs, maybe a bath. Instead, it brings dread. Because now, you are the one being besieged. The Turkish reinforcements arrive within days. Kerboga, the formidable Atabeg of Mosul, shows up with a force so large the ground seems to groan under it. His banners rise over the hills like ominous birds. The Crusaders, exhausted and starved, look from the walls of their hard-won city and realize they're trapped. Welcome to Siege 2.0. The oops were the ones inside edition. Food runs low. Again, of course. Water turns foul. A strange sickness moves through the city. People call it the Antioch Plague. You don't ask questions when a man vomits up something that rides. You see things, hear things. You start hallucinating that Jeffrey the dog is quoting scripture. Honestly, not the worst preacher. The ranks thin. Desertions begin. Some sneak out at night, trying to flee through enemy lines. Others just give up and walk into the wilderness with no food or plan, hoping for anything better than this stone tomb. You wonder if you should follow them, but something keeps you. Maybe it's pride, or spite, or the fact that Marta's face still floats in your dreams, silently judging you every time you think about running. Besides, where would you go? Europe? Back to onion farming? No thanks. It's at your lowest point that the whispers begin. A peasant, French probably, claims to have had a vision. Says the Holy Lance, the very spear that pierced Christ's side, is buried beneath the floor of the cathedral. You don't even blink, because of course there's a holy relic buried under your feet during a siege. Crusading logic. If things are bad enough, dig for magic. The peasant's name is Peter Bartholomew. Skinny, sunburned, with the eyes of a man who's either deeply blessed or one bad cheese away from madness. He insists the lance will save them. Bohemond rolls his eyes. Raymond, ever the pious one, buys in completely. A digging party is organized. You're recruited mostly because you still have a functioning back and fewer lives than average. You dig, day after day. It's hot, even underground. You sweat until your shirt is stiff with salt. One guy passes out in a pile of St. dirt. Another breaks a toe with a pickaxe. Finally, Peter lets out a cry, claims he's found it. The lance, there it is, sticking up from the ground like a half-buried sword. Some believe instantly. Others whisper that Peter probably buried it himself the night before. Historians still argue about this moment. Was it real? Was it a planted relic to boost morale? Does it even matter if it worked? Because weirdly it does work. Morale shifts. Men who had given up start polishing swords. They tie bits of twine around their arms like holy wards. Someone starts chanting that angels will lead the charge. You stare at the lance and wonder if it's divine or just exceptionally well-timed scrap metal. And then they decide to fight. Bohemond rallies the troops. You line up with a spear you definitely don't know how to use properly. Shoulder to shoulder with men too hungry to blink. But you're ready. Or as ready as you can be after 2 sieges, for months of trench rot and dreams about haunted cheese. The gates of Antioch creak open. You charge. It's not glorious. It's not cinematic. It's muddy and confusing and smells like boiled sweat. But the Crusaders fight like they've already died and come back meaner. Kerboga's forces are caught off guard. They didn't expect the besieged to break out. Chaos unfolds. You dodge arrows, trip over a fallen horse, nearly get brained by a flail that doesn't even belong to your side. Somehow, In the madness, you survive. You see Bohemian riding through the fray like a man possessed. He looks both magnificent and like he hasn't bathed in 3 eternities. And then, miraculously, Kerboga retreats. Antioch is saved. You won. Again, the survivors collapse in the ruins of the city. Someone's trying to write songs already. Others gather around the lance, kissing it, weeping. A few men shout that God was seen above the battlefield, glowing in white. You mostly just lie there, staring at the sky, and think about bread. Just warm bread. Peter Bartholomew becomes a celebrity. The kind of celebrity you get in the 11th century. Anyway, celebrated by the desperate, loathed by the powerful. Bohemian wants to move on. Raymond wants to stay and build a Christian stronghold. They fight politically and sometimes almost physically. You learn to slip between factions like a shadow. Now and then you deliver messages. Pretend to be dumb when nobles talk freely around you. You hear everything. And every time you hear the name Jerusalem, your stomach twists. Because that's the real goal, remember? That holy city no one has even seen yet. It's still out there, far to the south. Still waiting. And after all you've seen, after the sieges and sickness and questionable meat, you start to wonder what's left of you to bring there. But it doesn't matter, because the army begins preparing again. You pack what's left of your gear, your cracked boots, your dull sword, a letter that reads, "Tell my father I tried." Geoffrey follows at your heel, and you march toward Jerusalem, toward whatever comes next. You head south, again, but this time the sky seems different. Less like a ceiling, and more like a warning. Maybe it's the way the vultures circle too low, or how the desert wind carries heat that tastes like old bone. Or maybe it's because you know what's waiting, Jerusalem. The name passes between soldiers like a spell. Jerusalem, spoken with cracked lips and dry tongues. Some say it softly, like a prayer. Others shout it with a fervor that makes your skin crawl. You're not sure what you feel. Anticipation? Dread? Gas? The land gets crueler with every step. The Crusader army is a fraction of what it was. Disease, battle, betrayal. Take your pick. Whole units are gone. Others are stitched together from leftovers. Knights without horses, priests with swords, peasants with whatever pointy thing they didn't lose in Antioch. You walk next to a man who sharpens a soup ladle each night. Water becomes the obsession. Again, rivers vanish into sand. Springs turn out to be lies. You see one man fight another over a puddle that's mostly frog. They both end up drinking it anyway. You pass through Christian-held territory now. Sort of. The Byzantines? They're gone. They gave up after Antioch, washing their hands of the whole mess like Pilate, with better timing. You occasionally run into local Christian communities who offer food and shelter, but even they look at you with suspicion. Can't blame them. The Crusaders have developed a reputation. Not for holiness, not for mercy, for chaos. You sleep in abandoned towns where goats outnumber people. Some say these places were deserted because of locusts. Others whisper darker things. Curses, perhaps. A monk tries to explain that it's just poor irrigation practices, but he's ignored in favor of a more dramatic theory involving demons disguised as date palms. One night, you share a fire with a Syrian Christian merchant. He doesn't flinch when you tell him you're with the Crusaders. He just stares into flames and says, "You're chasing a city made of memory." You don't know what that means, but it stays with you. At one point, the army pauses to rest near the ruins of an old Roman fort. You explore the crumbled walls, hoping for shade or treasure or, let's be honest, edible moss. Instead, you find bones, stacked in corners, picked clean, a reminder that empires come and go, but dying in the Middle East remains very on trend. The closer you get to Jerusalem, the more people start acting strange. There's fasting, flagellation, public weeping. One guy insists on walking barefoot for the rest of the journey and ends up with feet that resemble boiled cabbage. Another man won't stop quoting Revelation, which gets less comforting the more sleep-deprived everyone becomes. You try to stay grounded, mostly by focusing on your dog and counting blisters. You talk to Geoffrey a lot these days. He's a good listener, even if he once ate your only remaining glove. Then, on a morning so hot the air itself seems a groan, you see it. Jerusalem. It doesn't look like heaven. It looks tired. Stone walls, sun-bleached and ancient. A city that has been fought over so often it seems permanently braced for impact. You half expect it to sigh as you approach. Everyone falls silent, even the loudmouths. It feels like stepping into a story. But reality kicks in fast. The Fatimid Caliphate controls the city now. Egyptian forces, not the Seljuks. They know you're coming. The walls are manned. The gates are shut. Welcome to your third siege. This time, the Crusaders are prepared. Sort of. A Genoese fleet has brought supplies to the coast, including, miracle of miracles, wood. Engineers begin building siege towers and battering rams. You're assigned to help drag lumber across miles of unforgiving terrain under the sun. It's like a team-building exercise if the team was dying slowly. There's no clean water, no food that doesn't crunch in weird places. Tempers flare. Fights break out. Some try to desert. You catch one man trying to trade his sword for a donkey skull. You don't stop him. It seems like a fair deal. And then the fasting starts. Not voluntary. Mind you, the leaders declare a penitential fast to purify the army before assaulting the holy city. You're already starving. But now it's spiritual starvation, which is apparently nobler. During these days, people break down. You see one knight weeping over a bent spoon. A squire recites the same psalm on loop until someone throws a helmet at him. A priest paints crosses on shields while muttering in 3 languages, none of which he speaks fluently. And yet, somehow, it all leads to this moment, the final assault. Siege towers are rolled into position. You're inside one, climbing rickety ladders with a sword that used to be a hoe. You're shaking, not with fear. Well, yes, with fear, but also with rage and hunger and something else, the realization that you made it, all the way from a mud-slick village and a ditch filled with wet turnips to here. The wall approaches. The world goes silent, except for the sound of archers and boiling oil in your own heartbeat. Then chaos. You burst from the top of the siege tower, like a bad decision. You fight across the battlements. You trip. You stab. You scream. You live, and then you see the flag, raised over the city. Jerusalem has fallen. You collapse. You don't cheer. You don't cry. You just breathe. The others celebrate. Some loot. Some pray. Some do both at once. Jeffrey curls up beside you, tail thumping gently against your leg. And you think to yourself, is this what victory feels like? Because it feels an awful lot like exhaustion. Victory, it turns out, is messy. There's no grand trumpet call. No angel descending on a beam of light to declare, well done, good and faithful onion farmer. There's just smoke, noise, and the smell of scorched sandals. Jerusalem has fallen, but the weight in your chest hasn't. You stagger through the streets in a daze. The holy city, they called it. It doesn't look particularly holy up close. More like an abandoned market the morning after a riot. Debris everywhere. Shouting, weeping, a goat somehow standing on a roof, bleating indignantly. This is your triumph. You, the Crusader, the pilgrim with a chipped blade, and a dog smarter than most of your superiors, are now one of the first to walk into Jerusalem after centuries of Muslim control. You were supposed to feel elation, awe, maybe the divine light of God. Instead, your feet hurt and you really want a bath. And then there's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Everyone heads for it like moths to a flame. The sacred site where Jesus was buried and resurrected. At least, according to the maps and the monks, and that one guy who always swears he knows a shortcut. You follow the crowd, partly because you want to see it, mostly because Jeffrey is already trotting in that direction. Inside, it's quiet, cool. Dust floats through beams of light, like little spirits. Knights fall to their knees. Priests sing off-key. A woman touches a stone and faints, either from reverence or dehydration. It's hard to tell these days. You kneel, too. You're not sure why. It just feels like the thing to do. Not out of deep faith. At this point, your relationship with God is best described as complicated. But because here, finally, you can breathe. And maybe because the smell is marginally better than outside. Then come the politics. Of course, Jerusalem might be sacred, but it's also real estate. And now that it's been conquered, the big question is, who gets to rule it? Bohemond isn't here. He stayed back in Antioch, likely measuring drapes for his new castle. But Godfrey of Bouillon, ever the mild-tempered giant, steps forward. People like him. He's not power-hungry like Bohemond, not sanctimonious like Raymond. Just solid, dependable, smells like leather and dust. He refuses a title king, though says he won't wear a crown where Christ wore thorns. So instead, he becomes advocate of the Holy Sepulchre, which is a mouthful, but sounds humble enough to get him elected. Historians still debate whether this was a genuine act of piety or a clever PR move to sidestep rival claims. You suspect it was both. Crusader leaders are nothing if not spiritually strategic. You, meanwhile, are offered a job. Not as a knight, please. You're barely qualified to swing a sword, let alone run a garrison. But you're good at surviving, at listening, at moving between worlds without drawing attention. So they put you on patrol. Civil security, they call it. What it really means is helping keep the uneasy peace between Crusaders and the locals, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, all of whom now live in a city that half ruins, half miracle. Some cooperate, others glare. You try to be fair. Geoffrey helps. He's disarming. People smile when they see a dog. They smile at you, too, sometimes. You think about Marta then, and wonder if she'd recognize you under all the dust and scars. One afternoon, a Greek Orthodox monk invites you for wine. His name is Leon, and he wears a robe that's more patched than fabric. He laughs easily, but his eyes are sharp. You Crusaders think the city is a prize, he says. But it's a wound, and every empire that claims it just presses harder on the bruise. You don't argue, mostly because you're busy trying to figure out if the wine has raisins in it or if it's just gone bad. But you remember what he said, because sure enough, tensions begin to rise. The Crusaders start building fortresses and distributing property. Some of it already has occupants. When that happens, well, things get unpleasant. Jerusalem wasn't empty. Now it's just under new management. You try to help where you can. Calm tempers. Offer bread. Patch up disputes before they explode. But there's only so much one dusty former farmer can do in a city made of prophecy and grudges. And then the pilgrimages begin. Europeans start pouring in knights, nobles, even families, eager to touch the stones where Christ walked, eat dust where Christ ate dust, weep in the streets like Christ possibly didn't do, but hey, why not? Some are devout. Others are tourists with better hats. You find yourself guiding a small group of Norman nobles who insist on seeing all the holy bits. They get heat stroke within 20 minutes and complain the entire time. One throws up in the Jordan River. You charge extra for that. Yet amid the chaos, you notice something strange. You're respected now, not as a hero, but as someone who made it. You were at Antioch, at Jerusalem. You carried wood and sword and sorrow, and somehow didn't die or lose your mind. Though there was that week where you talked to a beetle. You get invited to meetings, trusted with errands. People nod at you like you're part of something permanent. One night, while watching the stars from the roof of a chapel, you realize you haven't thought about home in weeks. Not once. You wonder if your village remembers you, if your father ever got your letter, if Marta married someone with better prospects, someone who didn't spend a year eating bugs and dodging arrows. You almost hope she did, because you're not the same person anymore. You're not even sure you remember who that was. Jerusalem glows in the moonlight below, ancient and fragile and fierce. And you, somehow, belong to it now, for better or worse. You wake up to a city that still doesn't know how to be peaceful. It's been months since Jerusalem fell. The shouting has quieted, the fires put out, and some markets have even reopened. But underneath it all, under the veils and prayers and patchy walls, there's a tension that never leaves, like the silence before a thunderstorm, or the moment when Geoffrey locks eyes with a pigeon, and you know you're about to apologize to someone's lunch. The holy city has been won, yes, but it hasn't been tamed. Your patrols take you through winding alleys where shadows linger longer than they should, Past churches rebuilt with salvaged stones, mosques now guarded by Crusader garrisons, synagogues hidden behind discreet doors. The city's rhythm is part devotion, part paranoia. People smile less. It's not just the locals, either. Even your fellow Crusaders, your comrades from 100 marches and miseries, seem changed. Some wear finery now, cloaks stitched with crosses and golden thread. Others hoard relics like magpies with theology degrees. A few wander the streets barefoot, preaching loudly to anyone who can't escape fast enough. You've seen a knight argue with none over the ownership of a saint's toe. Welcome to post-victory Jerusalem, where everyone wants a piece of God. You do your best to stay out of the squabbles. You're not here for relics or titles. You're here because, well, leave it would feel like admitting you don't know what comes next. And you don't. That becomes especially clear when you receive a letter, delivered by a merchant caravan. The parchment is crumpled and grease-stained, but the handwriting stops your breath. It's Marta. She writes that your father passed. Peacefully, thank God. He told her he hoped you'd find what you were looking for. She says she thinks about you when the sky turns gray over the barley field. Then casually, she mentions she's married now, a baker. You reread that part twice, and you feel nothing at first, just a strange stillness. Later, you realize it's not that you're heartbroken. It's that you're untethered. There's no home waiting for you anymore. No past to return to. No you that still fits back there. That night, you walk alone past the outer walls and sit beneath a squat olive tree. Jeffrey settles beside you, warm and silent. The stars above are brighter than back home, sharper somehow, less filtered by fog and smoke. You say her name once, softly, then never again. The next morning, you're called to a meeting. Apparently, a council is forming. Godfrey has received reports that the Fatimids are regrouping in the south. Egypt might try to retake Jerusalem. You're not surprised. Jerusalem has never been a final destination. It's a revolving door of conquest. You listen from the back of the room. Templars, Hospitallers, lords of various vowels, all debating defense strategies. You raise a question about food storage and are promptly ignored. It's fine. You're used to that. What catches your attention is a scholar from Genoa arguing that the Nile's flood patterns could delay any major Egyptian offensive until next spring. Another noble counters that intelligence gathered by Bedouin scouts suggests otherwise. Historians still argue whether there was ever a real, immediate Fatimid plan to retake Jerusalem at this time. Some say the threat was exaggerated to unify the Crusader states. Others claim the Fatimids simply miscalculated Crusader resolve. Either way, you're told to prepare. Again, but this time it's different. You're not just a soldier anymore. You're a citizen of Jerusalem. Technically, you have a place. Small, dusty, shared with 2 other survivors and a goat who won't leave. You've even got a new pair of boots, if you can believe it. Still, the weight never lifts. One afternoon, while escorting a group of Armenian traders through the Jaffa Gate, you overhear a child ask her father, "Why did they come?" And the father says, "To fix the world." You don't laugh. You want to, but you don't, because that's the cruelest joke of all, isn't it? You didn't fix anything. The crusade promised salvation and glory. Instead, it left cities in ruins, fields burned, families scattered. Jerusalem streets run quieter now, but not cleaner. And yet, something keeps you here. Maybe it's faith, however bruised. Maybe it's pride. Or maybe you're just afraid to go back to a world that kept turning without you. One morning, a man named Hugh arrives. He's fresh from Europe, blonde, shiny armor, big plans. He wants to spread the message of Christ to the surrounding villages. You end up assigned to him. Babysitting duty, essentially. Hugh is enthusiastic, painfully so. He talks about bringing peace, teaching the locals, building schools. You almost admire him, until he tries to convert an elderly shepherd by throwing a Bible at him. You pull him aside. You don't shout. You just ask him if he's ever actually talked to someone outside his own village. He hasn't. So you take him to meet a local healer, an old Muslim woman with eyes like obsidian and hands that once stitched up your leg after a street skirmish. She doesn't speak Latin. but she shows him her herbs. He listens. Sort of. He still insists on leaving a crucifix behind. But maybe, just maybe, you planted a seed. That night, you sit on your rooftop again. Jeffrey chases a moth in lazy circles. The city sprawls around you, imperfect and glowing. You realize something. You didn't come here to save Jerusalem. You came here to survive it. And you did. That's worth something, isn't it? Even if no one back home will ever understand what that means. You've seen things you'll never be able to explain, like how sunlight falls through the broken stones of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and turns shattered marble into a river of gold, or how a priest and an imam once traded herbs and jokes while their guard stared, too stunned to interrupt, or how a dog, your dog, managed to steal a roasted pigeon from a baron's plate without anyone noticing until the bone was gone. Life in Jerusalem is no longer about marching or battling or banners snapping in the wind. It's about maintenance, about balance, a balance you now tiptoe across every day, like a juggler walking a rope with too many swords in hand. You didn't plan on becoming a diplomat, but here you are, often being sent to resolve disputes. Someone's sheep wandered into a Crusader garden. A merchant from Tyre wants tax exemptions. A Templar claimed divine right to a baker's basement. You never expected bureaucracy to be more stressful than a battlefield. But it is. And yet, you're good at it. People listen to you. Not because you're noble or powerful, but because you're familiar. You're the Crusader who doesn't shout, who remembers names, who occasionally fixes fences in exchange for flatbread. A few even trust you. One of them is a local scribe named Fraught. He has the sharpest ink pen you've ever seen, and a smile like he knows every secret in the city. He teaches you a little Arabic. In return, you bring him parchment and fig cakes. One evening, as he's drawing a map of the surrounding countryside, he says, "This city breathes through cracks. Whoever tries to seal them will suffocate with it." You ask him what that means. He shrugs. Depends on who's listening. You write it down anyway. You're writing more these days. Not letters. There's no one left to send those to, but thoughts, moments, recipes, even. Fraught claims cinnamon helps with trench foot. You haven't tested this. Sometimes you imagine turning it into a book. How Not to Die in Jerusalem. Chapter 1. Don't drink the river water. Chapter 2. Don't correct a knight's Latin in public. But mostly you write to remember, because memory is fragile and you've lost too much already. Then, one gray morning, a knight named Arnold returns from a scouting mission with strange news. There are whispers of a new power rising beyond the Euphrates. A Turkish warlord gathering fractured forces, uniting clans, promising vengeance for Jerusalem. His name is Zengi. The name means nothing to you. Not yet, but it sends a ripple through the leadership. The council meets again. Maps are drawn. Scouts are sent. You're sent too, not as a soldier, but as an observer. It's your first time leaving Jerusalem in over a year. And it's jarring. The countryside is both familiar and alien. The burned-out villages, the silent groves, the distant shimmer of cities you pass on the way here, now rebuilt or reduced to ghost towns. Some places remember you. A shepherd waves. A boy shouts your dog's name. Others glare, and you don't blame them. At a ruin in near Jaffa, you stop a night. An old man shares his fire, says nothing, then hands you a bowl of lentils. You eat in silence. Later, he offers you a piece of charcoal and his wall. So you draw. Not well, but enough. A crooked sketch of Jerusalem, seen from the Mount of Olives. The dome, the towers, the twist of roads like a labyrinth made of prayers. He nods once, approving, and still says nothing. You wonder how many others like him were swept up in the wake of your crusade. People who didn't wear armor, didn't chant hymns, didn't know what indulgence meant, but lost just as much, maybe more. By the time you return to Jerusalem, there's news. Not about Zengi. He's still just a shadow on the horizon, but about trade. The Italian merchants want a better deal. The local Christian quarter wants autonomy. The new Frankish settlers want someone to explain how olive trees work. And someone stole a saint's toenail again, so it's back to work. Jeffrey, now older and slower but still surprisingly dignified, follows you like a shaggy shadow. He growls at a merchant who tries to sell you a holy feather. You thank him with a strip of jerky. You start attending evening sermons at a small chapel near the eastern wall. The priest is soft-spoken, with wild hair and a suspicious fondness for honey wine. His sermons rarely make sense, but he ends each one the same. Try not to make it worse. Solid advice, really, especially now that you're hearing murmurs about the other Crusader states, Edessa, Tripoli, Antioch, each with its own troubles. Fractured leadership, alliances of convenience, border skirmishes. The unity that carried the First Crusade has splintered into little thrones, each defending its patch of dirt. Historians still debate whether this fragmentation doomed the Crusader states from the start, or whether it was just a natural consequence of trying to build empires on borrowed time. You suspect it's both. You also suspect that no one really knows what they're doing anymore, but you keep showing up, not because you believe everything you fought for was just or right, but because people still need help crossing bridges. Literal ones. Often, the carpenters are overwhelmed. Sometimes you still think about your old life. You remember the rhythm of the fields, the ache in your hands after a harvest, the way Marty used to hum when she churned butter. You wonder what kind of man you might have been if you'd stayed. But that life isn't yours anymore. This one is. It's not clean or holy or peaceful, but it's real, and you've carved a place in it with your bare hands. One evening, as you watch the sun melt behind the western hills, Jeffrey curls beside you with a grunt. You scratch his ears and whisper, "We made it, old friend." He snorts, unimpressed, but you see his tail twitch once. That's enough. You're standing in the courtyard Crusader citadel, stone walls casting long shadows, orange light clinging to arrow slits, dust curling in lazy spirals beneath your boots, when someone asks you the worst question in the world. So was it worth it? You pause, mid-chew on a piece of hard cheese that tastes like regret, and look at the young knight who asked. He's got that glow, the same one you used to have. The hope, the naivety, the conviction that the world makes sense if you just pray hard enough. You don't answer, not because you're cruel, but because there isn't an answer. Or maybe there are too many. Instead, you hand him the rest of your cheese. He doesn't get the message. Let's be honest, Jerusalem is no utopia. You've spent the past few months watching the walls crack, both literal and metaphorical. Internal power struggles are picking up speed. Godfrey is dead, Baldwin is king now, and everyone is testing just how holy a kingdom really is when you can't afford firewood. Tensions between Crusaders and locals are growing again, especially in the outlying villages where taxes bite harder than swords. And the Italian merchants? They're practically running the ports now, charging tariffs like they're playing a medieval game of Monopoly. Your own life is a balancing act. You're part guard, part negotiator, part reluctant handyman. One week you're escorting a bishop to Acre. The next, you're fixing a grain store roof with someone who only speaks Armenian and communicates solely in sighs. And you're tired. Bone deep, soul level tired. Not just from lack of sleep or aching joints, but from the weight of seeing too much, knowing too much. There's a heaviness that creeps into your chest when you realize there's no going back to who you were. That version of you died somewhere on a bloodied hill outside Antioch. You don't even miss him anymore. Just sometimes you wonder what he might think of you now. Jeffrey still follows you everywhere, though his muzzle has gone gray and his enthusiasm for chasing goats has dwindled to suspicious glares. He's become your conscience, in a way. Or maybe your only surviving link to the beginning. That and your journals. They've gotten thicker, filled with observations, little drawings, snippets of overheard conversations, and sarcastic commentary on your own decisions. Like that one time you tried to explain feudal taxation to a group of monks using only pebbles and a loaf of stale bread. Spoiler, it did not go well. But you've also documented things no chronicler ever will, like the way certain city corners smell of cinnamon after market days, or how there's a kid near the Damascus Gate who's invented a game involving sticks, rocks, and shouting, "I'm Saladin," at confused Crusaders. A game that's growing in popularity. You haven't had the heart to correct them or stop them, because quietly, a new name is starting to pass between whispers. Not Zengi anymore, though he still looms large in the mind's commanders, but a younger name, Saladin. Historians still debate how early his legend began, whether the children's chants came before or after his rise. But you've heard the name, and something in your gut tightens. There's always another storm coming, isn't there? You don't know what kind of ruler he'll be, or if he'll come at all. But you do know that empires built on holy war tend to crack. Slowly at first, then all at once. It's not all bleak, though. There are small joys, like watching a Greek nun and a Syrian shepherd argue over the proper recipe for lentil stew. With so much passion, you wonder theology is really the issue at hand. Or finding a dog-eared copy of Pliny's Natural History in the corner of a ruined library and reading an entire chapter on turnip cultivation for no good reason. Or sitting on the southern wall at dawn, listening to both bells and calls to prayer echo across rooftops. Moments like that are why you stay. Because this city, for all its mess, is alive. It stumbles. It scars. It doesn't always learn, but it lives. You meet a pilgrim one day, an older man from the Rhineland who came all the way to touch the stone where Christ supposedly fell. He's crying, not because of revelation, but because his son died on the journey. He asks if you think it was worth it. You still don't answer, but you sit with him. Sometimes that's all you can do. One morning, you're called to help settle a property dispute between two monastic orders. You dread it instantly. Those tend to involve passive aggression, theological footnotes, and the occasional flying candlestick. This time, though, it ends peacefully. Both sides listen. Both concede. One even apologizes. You leave stunned. The world doesn't shift on its axis or anything. But you do catch Jeffrey looking at you like, well, that's new. You treat him to some roasted lamb that night. He earns it. Afterward, you return to your rooftop. The city is quieter than usual. Maybe everyone's tired tonight. Maybe they're just waiting. You wonder how long this quiet will last, and how loud the next chapter will be. You don't know how this story ends. You've read enough ancient scrolls to know how many narratives are unfinished. How many historians argue over what really happened, whether motivations were pure, whether heroes were villains, whether Jerusalem was ever truly won. Maybe it's not meant to be understood fully. Maybe some stories are only meant to be lived. You lean back against the warm stone, Jeffrey at your side, your breath slowing to match the distant rhythm of bells and footsteps and 1,000 whispered prayers. You close your eyes. Tomorrow it starts again. But tonight, for once, you let yourself rest. Dawn breaks over Jerusalem like spilled honey, slow, golden, and a little sticky if you're sleeping on a roof. You wake to the sound of market carts creaking below and a rooster with serious confidence issues. Jeffrey opens one eye, huffs dramatically, and then returns to snoring with purpose. You sit up slowly. Every joint files a complaint. Welcome to your bones' passive-aggressive rebellion. Today, for once, you don't have anything urgent. No disputes. No border patrol. No suspiciously dramatic monks demanding to know who moved their relics 3 inches to the left. Just the day. You're not sure what to do with that. So you walk. Jerusalem has changed. Again, it always does. New shops have opened. A woman from Cyprus now sells sugared almonds by the gate. A row of recently settled Franks have painted their shutters a strange teal color. Historically inaccurate, sure, but somehow charming. You nod at familiar faces. Some nod back. Others squint. Try to remember if they owe you bread or a favor. You stop at the Armenian Quarter, where a boy plays with a carved wooden knight, missing one leg. You watch him for a moment before pulling a little whetstone from your pouch and offering it silently. He beams and gets to work, as if sharpening a pretend sword might defend him from the real chaos of history. You keep walking. You pass a group of scholars arguing over whether the Dome of the Rock was once Solomon's temple, or if it's just a really well-designed caliphate power flex. They invite you into the debate. You politely decline and suggest they consult Jeffrey. One actually tries. Jeffrey sneezes. You pass churches, mosques, synagogues, each with their own rhythm, each held together by prayer, sweat, and what you assume is spiritual duct tape. Occasionally, you step into one, Sometimes just for the shade, sometimes for something quieter. Not belief, exactly, but space. Because here's the thing. You're not the same man who marched from France with a sword and a sermon in your heart. You're not even sure you're a Crusader anymore. No one really talks about that part. How being here long enough peels away the glory, the triumph, the righteousness, and leaves behind something humbler, raw, honest. You start to see people instead of sides. You begin to ask questions instead of quote doctrine. You learn how to listen. And maybe, most dangerously of all, you start to wonder whether peace could be something more than just a pause between wars. There's a growing camp of folks, priests, merchants, a suspiciously well-read camel trader, who speak of diplomacy more than conquest, who believe Jerusalem might endure if treated not as a trophy, but as a home. Of course, that idea doesn't sit well with everyone. Some call it heresy, others naivete. And historians? They'll be arguing for centuries. Did the Crusaders ever actually learn? Did they integrate? Assimilate? Or were they just temporarily tired? You have no grand answers. But you do have bandaged hands from helping a Syrian stoneworker rebuild a damaged aqueduct, and that feels like a decent argument in favor of coexistence. Later, you sit with Fraught again. He's older now, beard a little whiter, fingers permanently ink-stained. He shows you a new map, more detailed, more delicate. This time, he's named hills after jokes you once told. There's a Mount Grumble and a Valley of Forgotten Sandwiches. You both laugh, and then you sit quietly, because sometimes silence says more than sermons. You talk about writing a book together, something less about kings and more about bakers and dogs and arguments over soup ingredients. You don't know if it'll happen, but it feels good to imagine. And then, just as the sun slides low enough to turn the whole city into a watercolor, Jeffrey starts barking. You look up. There, by the gate, a small procession enters. Not soldiers, pilgrims, dusty, wide-eyed, muttering in awe. They've come from who knows where, chasing promises printed in parchment and blood. You watch them. One catches your eye. A woman. Strong shoulders, tired eyes, armor patched with care. She looks exactly like you once did, full of fire and questions and maybe just a little fear she doesn't want to admit. She asks if this is a holy city. You nod, and then with the softest smile you say, "Depends on who's listening." She doesn't understand. Not yet, but one day she might. You stand there a little longer, watching the sky bruise into dusk. Bells ring. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Jeffrey curls beside your feet. And for the first time in a long time, you feel something close to peace. Not the kind painted in mosaics or shouted from pulpits, but the kind built slowly. From sweat, patience, and cracked hands. A peace not won, but woven, piece by piece. The night settles in like a wool blanket, soft, heavy, and slightly scratchy if you pay too much attention. The hum of the city fades into background, a mix of distant murmurs, clinking pottery, and the low, rhythmic call of someone shutting a wooden door with care. You're back on your roof again. The stars peek out slowly, shy at first, then bold. Overhead, Orion leans on his club, forever frozen in mid-battle. Like the sky itself remembers how hard it is to stop fighting. Jeffrey lies beside you, one paw twitching in a dream. Maybe he's chasing goats again. Or sausages. Probably sausages. You stare up at the stars and exhale. The air is cooler now, almost sweet with the scent of fig trees and distant charcoal. A breeze brushes over your face, the kind that feels like a whisper, like someone telling you, "You've made it. For now, this is enough." And it is. You think of everything you've seen. The marches, the sieges, the empty stomachs and the full ones, the sermons shouted in firelight, the quiet moments in shadowed alleys, the laughter you never expected, the friends you didn't know you needed, the wounds, some healed, some not. And you realize something. You survived, not by winning, not by conquering, but by listening, by changing, by letting the world teach you things your sword never could. So you close your eyes, let your breath slow, let your muscles unwind one by one, like a carefully folded map finally laid to rest. The city hums on. But tonight, it doesn't need you. Tonight, you sleep. And maybe, just maybe, the story can sleep too.